And I'm going to start the webinar here. Hi, Hansuk. Okay. Let me get up here. Okay. There we go. Hello, folks. Welcome, welcome, welcome. We'll be getting started here in a couple minutes as we wait for everyone to sign on. You all can see my slides all right? Yeah. Okay. Awesome.
Yeah, Christina, I don't know if you mind, but we can see, it's like in the view where we can see all the ones on the side.
I'm okay with that.
Cool. Good. As long as you're good, I am good. All right.
I'm generally opposed to having Google Slides on present mode, and I'm not sure why. I'll have to think about that.
I understand.
Thank you for understanding. All right. All right, folks. So we are so glad to have you all here today. We're happy to reconvene for the first webinar for the 2020-2021 school year. And we think that this is such a wonderful way to kick off our webinar series for this year. And I think this is our third year of collaboration between the Language and Social Processes SIG and the Second Language and Research SIG. And the webinar series that we put on every year. So my name is Christina Ponzio. I am the SLR graduate student representative, and I'm joined today by a couple other folks. I'm going to invite Jill, Chris, and Hansuk to introduce themselves real quick, and then I'm going to turn it over to the panelists. So Jill, you want to introduce yourself real quick?
Absolutely. Hi, I'm Jill Scott, and I'm in the PhD program for literacy, culture, and language education at Indiana University. And it's great to see everybody.
Thank you, Jill. Chris?
Hi, everybody. I'm Chris Chang-Bacon. I'm an assistant professor at the University of Virginia School of Education and Human Development, and I am the social media coordinator for the SLR SIG. Welcome here.
Thank you. And Hansuk? Oh, we can't hear you. You're good.
Hi everyone, my name is Hyun-Suk Cho. I'm an assistant professor of TESOL at the University of North Dakota. I'm the webmaster of the Second Language Research SIG. Nice to meet you all.
Yeah, thank you so much. So today we are joined by four fantastic panelists who are going to share with us their wisdom around how to seek work-life harmony and take care of our mental health within the academy. So I'm going to turn it over to our four panelists. And ask each of you to introduce yourselves, perhaps briefly share about your scholarly background, your current context and areas of research, and maybe one trusted practice for how you maintain harmony between work and other parts of your life, like a quick, 30-second one, since you'll be sharing lots more about this. So I'm going to just start with whoever's in the topmost corner here. Luis, would you mind getting us started?
Absolutely. Thank you, Christina, and thank you as well, Jill, Chris, Hyun-Suk, for putting all this together. We're really appreciative of the work you do for both the Second Language Research SIG and the Language Social Processes SIG. So I'm Luis Poza. I'm an assistant professor of teacher education at San Jose State University, and I'm the chair of the Second Language Research SIG. My scholarly background, my PhD is in race inequality and language in education from Stanford University. And at San Jose State, I currently, my research focuses on language ideology, so the beliefs and attitudes about language and language learning, particularly around bilingualism, and how those manifest in educational policy as well as educational practice. So in terms of maintaining harmony between work and other parts, I think one trusted piece that I bring is just, well, one, therapy, but within that therapy is sort of the work around acknowledging that this is always going to be dynamic and it's always going to be a fluid harmony. And so recognizing that it's a process and never a state.
Jackie, you want to jump on in?
Sure, I can. Hi, everyone. I'm Jackie Ridley. I am currently an assistant professor at Kent State University. I'm in the early childhood and literacy programs. I was recently hired on, so I am hoping to share a little bit from both the graduate perspective as well as a new faculty member, but I finished my PhD at Ohio State this past summer. So the midst of all this pandemic with everybody else, and my research really focuses on the English language learning experiences of refugees and immigrants in English dominant schools, and particularly in contexts where bilingual education isn't an option for a variety of reasons. So I feel very fortunate to be in Northeast Ohio, where we do have a pretty diverse student population in my local school. So excited to be where my research interests were born as a K through 12 classroom teacher, and to be back here doing work educating future teachers. So a trusted practice, goodness. The one that comes to mind, I think, at the heart of this for me is I've transitioned from managing my time to managing my energy. And that's something I can share a little bit more about. But so we think a lot about time management, and sometimes time can feel like an oppressive or a scarcity. So I've focused my efforts more on managing my energy, which has become particularly important during these crazy times.
Wonderful, thank you. Raúl, would you mind jumping in?
Not at all. I'm happy to do that. Good afternoon, everybody, and greetings from Medellin, Colombia. My name is Raúl Alberto Mora. I'm an associate professor at Universidad Pontificia Bolivariana here in Medellin. My academic background, I have my PhD in language and literacy from the University of Illinois. I'm already a mid-career scholar here at the university. My research intersects second language studies and literacy studies in a little field that we're putting together here we call literacy in second languages, which we also develop with the research lab I run, which is the Literacy in Second Languages Project. And with all this work, always with a social critical, social justice perspective and a transformative view of classroom practice. As far as the trusted practice, when I was jotting down my notes, I remember one phrase that one of my mentors, one of my professors at the university, Dr. Yuri Bauer, once told me when I was a doctoral student myself, in a moment where I was trying to, find that harmony. And I remember that quote when she said, Raúl, the week cannot last 7 days. And I always remember that quote from Dr. Bauer, and I'm like, I always try, sometimes I fail, sometimes I succeed more, but I try to make sure that the week does not last 7 days. Even if it's 6.5, 6.25, or even less, but never go, because once you get to 7, you go into 8, and that's when the imbalance begins.
Thank you. Diana?
Sure. Hello, everyone. My friends call me Dee, or my students are starting to call me Dr. D. Diana or Deanna Arya. I'm at the University of California, Santa Barbara. I don't know if my video is pinned. Sometimes my snowball mic is not able to get picked up, but hopefully you can see me. My area of study is focused on community-based approaches for knowledge building and innovation across the lifespan. I'm interested in the language and literacy processes and practices that foster knowledge building across one's life. And I'm interested in different contexts, learning contexts for that. And part of what I've established at UCSB is that I have focused my work in working with others. And so one way that I bring a balance to the work that I do is, first of all, I've sort of created in my own mind, a Marie Kondo aspect of sort of thinking about what aspects of my professional life spark the most joy for me. And then that helps me see what aspects of my professional life maybe I should say no to, or maybe not yet to, right? Not say yes right away. And I think focusing on what really sparks the passion in the work that I do allows me to navigate, as well as realizing that my best work is when I do work with others. in that collaborative nature actually brings greater joy and less sense of anxiety about the work that I do, because I'm accomplishing something with others.
Wonderful. These are such great little tidbits. I'm so excited for the other pearls that you all will be sharing today. So I'm going to be moving us through the series of questions that folks contributed today, and then I'll be turning it over to my co-host to jump in to help transition as well. As we transition to the next set of slides, I'm going to ask the four of you to just sort of take it up and ping pong, have a discussion around those questions for about 10 minutes, and then we in the background will handle transitioning over. In the meantime, those of you who are our attendees, we'd love for you to introduce yourselves in the chat. That is also a great space for you to pose additional questions as we go along that we might be able to fit in. We do have a pretty packed agenda. But in the meantime, we also ask you to, or encourage you to tweet out and tag us on Twitter. And you can see that those tags are included at the bottom of the slide. So let's go ahead and jump into the first series of questions. So with respect to these, folks were curious to know how you all think about seeking work-life harmony, both in the before times and what will hopefully eventually be the after times of COVID, and then of course considering this in the context of COVID. So some of the themes that came up in questions in relation to this were things like, how do you find harmony between work and life, just in general? And I think you've all spoken to this a bit already. How do you protect your time beyond the academy for things like yourself, your family, non-scholarly passions, if it's possible for those to exist? And how do you channel energy and passion into things like teaching while also carving out time for research and writing? So go ahead and take it away around this for about 10 minutes.
Well, I actually want to start because as I was jotting down my notes, I actually started asking myself a question. What do we mean by harmony? And sometimes I really worry about that word, the word harmony, because, and again, because I kind of think, okay, harmony, this perfect balance, this perfect yin and yang, where your office has all the feng shui. And I mean, I don't even know what harmony means. And sometimes I worry if that the word itself causes extra anxiety because, oh my God, my life is not harmonious enough. Like, okay, first of all, what do you mean by harmony? Harmony, do we mean you can have time to do little things and prioritize, or you just gonna, oh, everything is in its perfect place and its perfect time? So I think kind of like, if we think about harmony as setting boundaries for the moments where I'm refusing to do work, and the moments when I'm going to be focused on my research, when I'm going to be focused on my teaching, on my lesson planning, then maybe we can talk about harmony. But if we're talking about that perfect balance that doesn't exist, I don't know. I think that for me, that may actually cause further anxiety. I don't know what my colleagues think about that.
This is Arya. I think that is a really important question, is what does it mean to live harmoniously, especially in the conditions that we're living in? I can already feel the pressure of needing to be happy, you know, some of the things that one might associate with being harmonious. This is not quite a harmonious climate that we're living in so many layers. You know, acknowledging the hardships that are all around us is so crucial, because with that acknowledgement then comes in the action and creating actions that do bring peace, right? So that's been well researched, is that when we are activists, when we have an activist stance, and that's one of the stances that I foster in the programs that I lead, is what kind of actions do we want to take up, and those active responses to our conditions through protest, through other stances of change bring a peace and a sense of empowerment and well-being that we need. And sometimes that means great effort and being part of collaborative effort. So I agree with you that is something worth exploring on a complex and a deeper level. I'm interested in what others are thinking.
Jackie, I'm really curious to learn from you about the distinction between managing time and managing energy. So I'm going to invite you to jump in.
Oh man, I was going to say that I feel like Luis just put this little softball out there in the beginning of that this fluctuates, that it's, you know, this work life, if you want to call it harmony, balance, integration, whatever you want to call it, that it's dynamic and it's seasonal. So I do think that is something that's worth revisiting and just remembering. And I think that kind of what Raúl said, and even what Dee was saying, this sort of allows you to take the pressure off to feel that perfect balance, but rather to remember right now I think we are all very much in a time where I don't know if harmony is something I would use to describe anything that's occurring in my life. However, I don't know if that means I'm doing something wrong as much as I'm living in a current reality. So I'm really glad this is still how we're talking about this, because I think it's a really good reminder that you're not doing something wrong if this is hard. If this isn't working out for you right now, or this is challenging, you haven't done something wrong, or it's not that you haven't found the magic combination. So, but I hope Luis, you'll get to share more about that. But for me, with managing time versus managing energy, and I believe this might actually be coming up in a future slide, but just to preview a little, because time is fixed, if we view it as our enemy, you're always combating an enemy you're just not going to win. You can't win against something that is, if you're viewing time as your adversary or something you're up against, you're just combating all the time. Versus if we see time as neutral, and then we start to think, well, how about my energy? So for me personally, just to give examples, because I think everyone this will look different. One of the benefits maybe of our current life is that I am home in the middle of the day when the weather in Northeast Ohio is lovely. So that's when I go for a run, or that's when I go for a walk. So that's when I'll take my mental break, versus I can work in the morning when it's darker out or colder, because it is getting cold here already. But so just an idea of how maybe for me personally, I know that I write best in the morning. So I block off that time. I don't check my email then. And then when that's done, when that time is set aside, that's my energy. My energy is highest in the morning. When I'm done, when I've expended that, I can turn my efforts to different things. So, and I can share more about that, but that's mainly how I've really began to think about. I know that by the end of the day, I shouldn't be investing into a new topic that requires a lot of brain power or creativity. So the end of the day for me is reserved for other tasks that can be checked off maybe with less creative effort. So that's how I've sort of started to transition to managing energy. Go ahead, Luis.
No, I was gonna say, thank you. It's a helpful framework, and I think I would echo that, right? Which is to know yourself, right? Know what works best for you in terms of, what times are most important to you. When is your most productive time? When is your when really matters to you? Like I learned that it really mattered to me to be part of my daughter's bedtime routine, and I started kind of trying to build my day around that in some ways, right? And kind of. So there's a dimension of sort of adding structure and doing that pre-work to identify the priorities that I wanted to structure around. But then also acknowledging, that this is flux, right? So even in pre-COVID times, right? Knowing that there are going to be very busy times of the semester or busy times of the career, right? The years when I have, right, a portfolio to submit or something like that are going to be different than the years I don't. So just knowing that it's going to be a dynamic equilibrium as opposed to a stasis, I think that has also helped me really keep things in perspective. And then also trying as much as possible to not see them as dichotomous, right, as work and life, and trying to just acknowledge that if I'm not happy in my personal life, I'm not going to be happy in my work. All right, I'm going to be resentful of my work, and vice versa, that if I'm not happy in my work, I'm going to carry that into my personal life and into my relationships with my partner and my daughter and stuff like that. And so really trying to be mindful and judicious then again, and we'll talk about it more later about how do you say no, right? But so trying to really acknowledge that these things aren't sort of indistinct scales, right? But that they are very much enmeshed. And so the harmony means that I have to try to make time for the things I value in both of them.
Actually, I wanted to just pick up where Luis left off and kind of go into the question about protecting your time, because I think it's important to also consider that. And I would say the first thing that it's by not feeling guilty that you're protecting time. Sometimes academia has really weird ways to make you feel guilty that you're not doing something. Not only that, as Jackie said, that you're doing something wrong, but that you're not doing something. It's like, oh, wait, I'm not working on a paper now, or I'm not writing a grant, or I'm not working on an AERA proposal, although the conference is in April, I should be working on my presentation right now. Like, academia has these serious ways to make you feel guilty that you're not doing academia. So I think, I mean, for me, that's the first key. I protect my time by not feeling guilty that I'm taking a nap, or by not feeling guilty that I'm gonna stop working now. I'm gonna get my dogs, Connor McLeod and Duncan McLeod, dressed and ready for a walk, that I go for a walk and I don't think about the next paper, the next assignment, the grading, no. I think that's the first thing that we have to keep in mind. Like, if we're taking time off, whether it's an hour or a day or a week, let's not feel guilty about it. Because then we're always thinking, oh, when I go back, I have to answer 100 emails. Yes, you have to answer 100 emails, but don't ruin the moment. Don't dampen the moment by thinking of the 100 emails, because the 100 emails are still going to be there. So why ruin the moment thinking about the 100 emails? No, when it's time to sit down and answer the 100 emails, you're going to either answer them or delete them or send them to spam or do whatever you need to do with those with the time. But I think for me, it's important that we always have to keep in mind there is always things to do. There is always deadlines. There is always something we have to turn in. There is always grades we have to upload to the system. But if we do not take time for ourselves, and I always like to say something to myself, I tell my students, if I don't take breaks, my body breaks. And when my body breaks, I have to take a break anyway. It's going to be worse. So always keep that in mind. I mean, that will be the beginning part of this conversation.
Yeah. So I'm going to jump in there and we're going to transition in a second, but I just want to say a few things that I was hearing y'all say. Is this doesn't surprise me when we're talking with a group of scholars, that part of this is naming our constructs and recognizing that we're implicated in this sociocultural system, a hegemonic system that is imposing certain expectations on us. And by naming them, we have the opportunity to decide what stance we can take and what action we can take to resist that. And a big part of that, it sounds to me like, is being mindful. And so I think that's going to help as we transition to this next slide. And I think you all have sort of alluded to some of these already, but hopefully you can expand on this. What additional specific tools and strategies can you point to that have helped you do things like manage your time, this fixed construct that Jackie was talking about, that we can either choose to see as our enemy or not? How have you stayed organized, especially as our days have become like much more whatever this is? How do you identify and uphold priorities and maintain motivation? And then how do you negotiate all of that with the current reality? So we'll go ahead and spend another 10 minutes on this set of questions.
So I actually wrote some things down ahead of time. So I have them right here. I have a two-pronged approach on it, and I don't think that it's unique. I have a questioning tool inside my head, an internal questioning tool. So, and I love writing things down. It's just a real strategy of mine. It helps me sketch out my day. And I love creating, I don't know if a ritual's a way to say it, but it's a nice practice. It's a literacy practice that feels like mine. And so I kind of enjoy it. and I still bring in those spark joy kind of ways of thinking, like, you know, how I can see this as a part of who I am, so that it's built into the ways in which I manage myself and my life, my work and social lives. So I create all sorts of like outlines and checklists, so it's satisfying to kind of go through it. I can also go back to see what I've accomplished. So some kind of record keeping. I like it concrete. In the digital world, it's just one thing I can hold on to. I particularly like Rodia. It's an old one. It's an old engineering. So there's these little, I can draw on them. It's kind of a grid-like, but everyone has their own way of doing that. And through that, I have a questioning tool that I use. I'm thinking about, you know, my goals, my larger goals and my short-term goals. So it's similar to other organizing programs in the past that I've tried out. I also, you know, think about, okay, if my long-term goal is to have this accomplished at the end of the quarter, what would be good for me to think about doing today or tomorrow? So it's just one way that I keep track of. But little apps that I'm considering, because I'm also growing to in my fluidity around how I organize my life. There are email management apps out there that allows sort of, I kind of see them akin to maybe if you're away for a weekend, you know, cat dispensary, food dispensary, you know, so your cat can be fed, you know, that kind of thing. It's an app that allows you to not feel like you're flooded, your emails are flooded. That is definitely a bulk of our anxiety when we wake up in the morning, we see just these emails. But I do what others have done. Jackie mentioned, Dr. Ridley mentioned her before, that she kind of like, there are times when I check my emails and there are times that I don't. And because it's part of my life pattern, it's okay. It's part of my life pattern. This is what I do. I'm also constantly keeping a check with what I'm getting involved in and how it promotes where I want to go in my career, just in ways of managing. Now, I just recently got tenure, and that was a very intense process. Thank you. It was a very intense process, and there are many things I could share on that process. But just as others have said, the tenure track is one that is a little bit, it can be ruthless in the sense that, you know, what matters, even though your professional activities and your service matter and your teaching matters. With a R1, it's about research with a capital R and what publications you've got out there. I'm hopeful that in this sociocultural revolution that we find ourselves in, many of us are starting to question that. So another part of your work-life balance is seeing how you can be part of the change that needs to happen in the academia. Just because you're asked to do something doesn't mean that it was right to depend on you. And you think about all the assistant professors that I've had the pleasure to know, and myself as assistant professor, I will tell you that we do the bulk of the work, especially new stuff. I see that constantly. Who gets the huge loads of teaching, all of their committee work. I'm just keeping it real, but there is a growing movement to make sure that that's not all on the backs of new faculty. Know that part of this balance is, again, that activism that you can partake in that gives you a sense of, yes, you are legitimized to feel overwhelmed and you deserve some space. So that's what I have to share.
Thank you. Yeah, so I'll follow. I mentioned in my introduction that therapy was one of my major kind of coping practices. And I would say that this is actually one of the areas, insofar as therapy around work issues, like this is probably the area where I've invested the most sort of time and attention and energy. And it is very much addressing what you're saying, you know, in terms of this kind of the trap of the tenure track and, you know, losing the forest for the trees, right? Like, am I publishing enough? Am I publishing in the right places? Am I serving on enough committees? Am I, you know, like, it's very easy to sort of lose yourself in that, and just the day-to-day work, and lose sight of the bigger picture, the larger objectives, why you're doing this why we're doing this in the first place. You know, and I think overlaid upon that is not only sort of our sense of duty and obligation, right? Like, we're all in this profession because we're to some level good at school, right? And we're good rule followers and institutionalists on some level. And so, you know, there's that part. But then on top of that, like, we're also very ambitious and like determined and kind of perfectionists to an extent. And so we're not only thinking about our own performance, but we're also sort of measuring that performance against whatever standard we're setting, right? Like, who is the, you know, I know for me, like my mentor, Guadalupe Valdez, who I, you know, love and respect. And I mean, for me to have half the career that she's had would be an accomplishment. And yet, you know, there's always that voice that's saying like, well, you know, Guadalupe by this time had done this, well, you know, and so like shaking that, right? And just saying like, you know, her career was different from my career, and this is what I'm doing with my career, and it'll go where it goes. And I'm doing this part because I love this part. So, you know, looking at these bullet points, a lot of my work in therapy has been really just thinking through what are my priorities? What are my values that are driving me in this profession, right? You know, why am I an academic instead of a school leader, or instead of a director of an education nonprofit, or something like that, right? Or a policymaker, or some other way of influencing education. You know, what strengths do I bring to academia that brought me into this and that motivate me, things like that. And so from there, trying to organize. And then I would, you know, I think my strategies are very similar to what you mentioned, Dee, right? So I also write everything from like lists to reflections to short little like poems and scribbles sometimes, to just capture where I'm thinking and what projects are going. And also keeping the long view in mind. So, you know, I think, right, there is, and we see it, I think I'm seeing it now more than before, the kind of service that's being put upon junior faculty when departments are suddenly pivoting to racial justice. And it, you know, it just happens that younger, or I won't say younger, but newer faculty are more immersed in sort of these discourses and more familiar with these conversations and this work. And so, like, I'm seeing more service, and I'm cognizant of what it means to take on more service. And I'm also cognizant of the path that I'm making for myself if I help shape the department in these things that matter to me, right? Like, I'm really grateful that we have leadership that cares about these things and is not just saying it, but is really willing to put in work. And I'm cognizant that if I'm helping shape that work, then the department will be a place that is more attentive to some of these inequities, and in our hiring, in our retention, in our student supports, and in all those things. So, yeah.
You know, I'm picking up, it's interesting. This morning, my wife, she's also a professor, and she was in a conference call with a colleague in England. And when I mentioned this presentation, he's like, so what are you gonna tell people? He was very curious about, what are you gonna tell people? I said, well, my first piece of advice, and I think that's what I want to start in this particular section, has to do with kindness. And I say, well, first of all, one of the first strategies I'm using is I'm making sure I'm kinder to myself than I usually am. Again, because what Luis was saying, we're very competitive, we're driven, we're motivated. And in that competitiveness, in that drive, we sometimes can be very harsh to ourselves. We're basically our own reviewer too. If we go with the ongoing joke in academia, we sometimes are our own reviewer too. And sometimes we are very harsh to ourselves. So you published a book chapter. Why didn't you publish that in a journal? And if you publish in a journal, then why wouldn't you publish in that other journal? So we kind of like, we even sometimes we torpedo our own accomplishments. And I think in a time like this, in the sense of finding that balance, and even that, I think kindness is a very good place to start. Where we understand that things are difficult, that these are very unusual times that no one in 100 years had ever had dealt with, and that everybody's doing the best they can with the tools they got. That we're still getting papers published, that we're still getting conference papers accepted, that we're still writing proposals for research projects, that we're still managing to get books with proposals sent to editors, that those things are still happening. That maybe they're not happening at the same pace that we used to in 2019 or in 2018, and it's fine. And maybe it's fine. And maybe take a time like this to slow down, to start what Diana was talking about, that movement, that revolution that we're starting, where maybe we can reprioritize and we can return to some of this lower pace, this low culture. And also for me, it's like I've made an effort to prioritize my health, because I've had some health issues, not major, but something if I don't take care of, it's going to become something major in 10 years. So I'm like, okay, I need to really get serious about this. Think about, I'm running out of time for this. I need to start working out. I need to start paying attention to my weight, to my eating habits. And even that brings an effect to the other side, because sometimes we neglect our health. And I've done it a few times. I have neglected my health a few times, and then my body has broken. And I had to pay the toll. So always keep that in mind. But I would say really that if there is one thing I hope people get from today's webinar is that extra degree of kindness to oneself, because sometimes we're too harsh to each other. We can be, and it's funny because sometimes we can be very understanding to our grad students. We can be very understanding to the junior faculty we help. We can be very understanding when you have like undergrads and grad students writing you emails asking questions for whatever. But then when it comes to us, we can be very harsh. So give ourselves that extra level of kindness can go a long way into finding those levels of balance that we're seeking.
Okay. I think that we'll move on, unless Jackie, did you want to add something to that?
I think what was said was lovely. I'm happy to add as we continue on, but we're really lucky to get to learn from. I'm great. I'm learning as well. So this is I'm treating this as a participant and as well.
Okay, thank you. I know I'm learning so much, and just to kind of recap a little bit about what I just learned from our last round of questions. I think really the thing that stood out to me was intentionality, and intentionality as a tool, as a tool to help ourselves find this balance and maintain the balance. And intentionality as far as tools can appear in different ways. And I think we heard about writing and keeping organized in that way through lists, reflections. I appreciated the scribbles and poetry as ways to just kind of capture where we are. And then we heard about therapy and keeping the big picture front and center, and shaking this idea of comparisons. And then establishing a stance of kindness to self. And I think when we do that, it does extend to others. And just really keeping this front and center, and that also forcing us to kind of take a reflection and moment to slow down and prioritize our health as well. So thank you for that. Moving on to our next slide, we have a focus on kind of boundary settings, and also how you find support within your institutions. And so the first question really talks about how your institutions support scholars seeking this balance. And are you finding support within academia? Do you find that that's something that's supported out there? And then what advice do you have for establishing boundaries as graduate students and early career scholars? When and how do you say no? And how do you ask for help without feeling like a burden? And so we'll take about 10 minutes now and let you talk about those questions. Thank you.
I can start us off a little bit from a graduate perspective or graduate student perspective, just having very recently been one for 4 years. And I think that those last 3 bullet points, establishing boundaries, how and when do you say no, and how do you ask for help without feeling like a burden, are really intimately connected. And I think some of it can go back to what Dee said about sort of that filter, those questions of my priorities. So whether you're Marie Kondoing, you're figuring out what brings you joy as a scholar, or as a doc student, maybe you're deciding what's on my critical path, for lack of a better word. What do I need to accomplish in my time here? And is this contributing to me accomplishing that? So for me personally, I'm a mom of 3 kids. I'm a foster parent, so there's no shortage of home life. I also have to acknowledge that anything I share with you is still coming from the place of privilege. I am a white presenting woman, I am English dominant, so I enjoy a lot of privilege that is not universally enjoyed by graduate students. So just take that with a grain of salt. I acknowledge that I can do things with that privilege that doesn't happen for everyone. So in thinking about how do I set better, so even just thinking about how do I continue to dismantle these systems for others that don't have the same amount of privilege, but that needed to be said. As we're talking about all of this. But in terms of how and when do you say no, I would just encourage you also to think about what Raúl said of just speaking kindly to yourself and considering, would you ever talk the same way to someone else the way that you're talking to yourself? And also, sometimes we think, oh, that person's gonna never forgive me for saying no, or they're gonna think less of me. But when someone says no to you, is that what you think? This usually isn't what happens. So just kind of rehearsing reality to yourself of, oh, I can say no. And you also don't have to have long flowing explanations. I actually had a sticky note on my desktop that I started as a graduate student based on the advice of the National Center for Faculty Development and Diversity. They have a great email listserv, and one was about saying no. And I have a sticky note on my desktop of sentence frames that start with, thank you for this opportunity, or this sounds like a really great thing. However, I am not available right now, or I have to say no at this time. And I've trained myself really hard to not apologize and to not offer an explanation, because I don't have to. I can say no. So having those sort of no's ready to go, and I cut and I paste them into emails, has worked out really well, especially if you're someone who in that moment is going, but it's this person or it's this opportunity, how do I do this? Having those no's ready when you have already decided what your path is and what you're about. And if those, if it doesn't hit all those check boxes and you need to say no, sometimes being ready with a couple things where you just are those kind of not canned responses, but those ready to go things to stick into your email has been really helpful for me. And along with that, ways to, if you're tempted, this is, I think, particularly a female issue where we tend to say we're sorry for things that when we haven't actually hurt someone or done something wrong. So a lot of things saying like, I appreciate your understanding. I appreciate your consideration. I appreciate your time or your flexibility, as opposed to saying, I'm so sorry. So just kind of getting into those practices have been super helpful. And then it's that practice, that almost pretending to be more confident than you are, makes for great practice, and you begin to become that person. So I feel like a much more confident and secure person after having practiced this for the last several years, which I think is serving me well as an assistant professor, experiencing some of what has been shared about what happens with assistant professors. So, or just new faculty. So I would say, as hard as it is, learning how to say no and learning how to not apologize, but to thank someone and say, not at this time, or I appreciate that. And finding that, I think, is really going to do a lot for then that establishing boundaries becomes a lot less of an uphill battle. And I'll leave that there.
So I'll build on that because I think that's important to know and have sort of those messages prepared. You may, and hopefully not, but probably will come to a situation or find yourself in an experience where someone above you in a supervisor role, your boss, will ask you to do more. That happened to me as an assistant professor, where I am leading 5 different programs, youth-based programs, and I was already stretched at the seams. I was asked by someone above me to take on even more. And what do I do there when I feel completely stretched? In the one place where I was hoping for support, I got a demand instead. And I don't think the demand was nefarious. I actually think the demand was really focusing on the fact that there is this need, right? So, you know, again, there's this sort of view from a leader's perspective of what needs to get done, who knows it, and who can work on it. So what do I do in that situation when I am beyond, like I'm beyond stretched? So what I did is I created a network of mentors. So that is one of the things that I would say to you. A lot of mentoring programs match you with one person, but there are new models in place where some mentors are really good at some things. Like I know someone who's really good at helping people with their writing. Maybe they're not as good at other kind of mentoring activities. So we're starting to see who has strengths in what. But I created a network of mentors, and I got one mentor. She is amazing for advocating for me in my time. And after the 3rd time of saying she's stretched, you know, she is overextended in her roles, there was some back off. And so knowing who those mentors can be and reaching out and receiving that, there's some action on your end as a junior scholar, but that is what I would highly recommend, is finding who can advocate for you that's in a more senior position.
I just want to second that, the value of those mentorship webs, right? And just knowing, you know, all right, so who can I go to, who I can really confide in and just say, I can't say yes to this. Can you help me say no? Can you, you know, sort of be my voice in a position of authority to say no to this for me? And then I have my other mentors for other pieces, my writing and things like that. And then I think also on the subject of saying no, just another strategy. I have my own sort of sticky note idea that I got through a mentoring fellowship that I had in graduate school, which was also just to keep a sticky note for all the things that you say yes to, right? So it started as a sticky note system. Now I have it as a spreadsheet, but just all the things I'm actively working on, all the things I want to work on, right? So what are those writing projects that I've put on the back burner because I'm already too busy or whatever? You know, and so all those things that I'm already doing, right, which remind me all the times I've already said yes. And then that goes kind of hand in hand with a nugget from Shonda Rhimes' The Year of Yes, which is just that saying no is just saying yes to something that means more to you, right? Is that if I say yes to something that someone asked me to do it, and I say yes because I feel a sense of obligation or whatever, that I am implicitly saying no to something that I actually want to do. And so having that same list of the things I want to say yes to, having those priorities in mind, gives me more confidence in saying that no, right? Or in approaching a mentor to help me sort of deflect the request from above or things like that.
Yeah, but I want to pick up with what Luis was talking about, because this is the flip side to that coin. It's that if you're in a position of power, you also have to learn to know when it's a right time to ask, because it seems sometimes we put a lot of the burden of saying no on the person who's being asked the question, but we're not reflecting, is this the right time to ask that person to do this? I mean, even when you're in a position, and I can say that I'm talking about a position that is sort of kind of high ground, because in the sense I'm already tenured, and I have the advantage of being like, at the Colombian research system, I have a high rank, so that allows me the possibility to really move the agenda in whichever direction I want. But in that sense, now I have my students, I have my mentees, and I'm always careful not to overburden them. And if one of them says, Raúl, I cannot help you with any writing this semester, I mean, it's cool. Just prioritize what you need to prioritize and keep it posted. And when you feel you're ready to go back, get back into the game, just suit up and get back into the game. but it's also learning not to burden people. So I think it's not just a matter of us learning to say no, but also at the institutional level, knowing when it's the right time to ask, knowing if it's worth asking, and then really, because I mean, something again, moving the pressure from having to say no to and realizing maybe this is the right time to ask that question to that person so they can say yes, and that can maximize their potential. They can maximize their career opportunities. Also, in the sense of boundaries, I always think it's important as we get things done and as we take, it's always the idea of rewarding yourselves and the people around you. That's something I always tell my grad students particularly. As you reach different milestones, for example, you submit, let's say you submitted a full draft for your thesis that I have to read. I always tell them, all right, great. Now, here's your homework for the weekend. You're gonna take your family out for dinner, or you're gonna go on a long week, or you're gonna take him on have a getaway weekend with your wife or with your girlfriend, with your children, or if you don't have, and then with your mom, with your sister, whoever is part of your family circle. Because I always think like, no, you cannot, you're not alone in all this. You have family members, you have children, you have parents, you have dogs, you have cats. I mean, there is all different permutations. And we're not, sometimes we don't think about the importance of rewarding, the importance of, keeping the inner circle happy and aware that their sacrifices, that their compromises are important. And I think that also helps a lot in all these setting boundaries, in the sense of I also think about my inner circle and the people around me and the time they deserve. And that also helps in these little issues of balancing work and life.
Thank you so much, everybody. That was really profound, and just what I'm hearing from everyone is it's okay to have boundaries. You have a right to say no to things. We sometimes feel like we don't, but honestly, often we're policing ourselves about that in a lot of ways. So thank you for reminding us of that. For our last question of the day, folks were curious how you navigate positionality and work-life harmony, particularly advice you'd have for scholars who identify as Black, Indigenous, or people of color, and or identify as women, identify as trans, identify as non-binary, all of these historically underrepresented groups in academia for whom we know work-life harmony can be especially hard. And also, if you feel comfortable speaking to it as well, what can folks in positions of more privilege who are listening and might be listening do in addition to that to help, as Jackie talked about before, dismantling these systems of privilege as well?
I think I'll go ahead. I want to specifically talk about a very particular group. And now that I see my good friend and colleague, Dr. Cheng Bacon, I think he already knows where I'm going with this. And it's the international students, the non-Anglo scholars and the non-Anglo students, the ones who are, let's say, in the U.S. in international students, especially those whose first language is not English. And I would say, first of all, I'd say to them, congratulations, you're making the effort of your lifetime. I mean, writing a dissertation is difficult. I mean, if you're a doctoral student and your native language is Spanish, Mandarin Chinese, Tamil, Russian, whatever, you're writing in a second language, that is already adding an extra layer to what is already an incredible accomplishment. If you're getting your publications in a language that is not yours, you're already adding layers to what already are accomplishments. So in that sense, don't feel bad about whatever you think is missing in your repertoire. Think about all that you have and how much power you're bringing to the conversation. So I'll be the first advice. Now, the opposite side is for the people who are mentoring and supporting these kinds of students. please do not forget that they have a lot of extra hurdles, and it's not just the language. This past year, I have ached for international students in the U.S. I've ached for them because I'm a Fulbright scholar. I was on a student visa, and there were moments in my life that I was worried that something was going to happen to me, that I wasn't going to make enough progress in my dissertation. They're going to simply cancel my visa. Now imagine adding all this political turmoil, that you have international students fearing for their lives. And I'm saying that almost literally, fearing for their lives because their livelihood is getting their degree. And they have been worried that they're canceling their visas, that they're canceling their funding, that they're canceling scholarships. And this is a time where they need mentors. They don't necessarily need advisors. They don't necessarily, no, they need mentors. They need people who tell them, we're here for you. And we feel it. And we feel for you. And really, because that's what they need right now. I was an international student, and I was very fortunate to have good mentors who not only cared about giving me feedback on my drafts, but on the personal side of it. And I try to now pay forward with my advocacy for international students, for my advocacy with my students here in Colombia. So that would be my part. It's, if you're dealing with international students, that extra level of kindness is gonna go a long way in their success.
I'll build on that. I have a big heart for international students. I'm a daughter of an immigrant parent, came here to study in higher education. And I'm also bicultural. I identify as bicultural. And I use pronouns she and they. I think that this has been the most horrific period in my educational life, is navigating the real difficulties of our international students. I had one who was stuck at the airport on the Mexican side of Baja because of ICE agents and lies. It was lies and just intimidation. And so the former administration really did a number on our students. I'm still waiting for one of my graduate students to come and study with us when it's safer to do so. So the way, I don't know if this is a balance, because I will say this has been very stressful for me, but the only way that I can deal with this is to be real. And so I am very transparent in who I am as a scholar, because one of the things I really want to communicate to every single student is that the price of the ticket into higher ed, you've already paid it, you're here. And so I agree with Dr. Mora, who talked about the mentoring that's needed. So I was lucky to have my advisor who sat next to me and thought out loud as he was helping me write my papers. And that's kind of what I still do today. I meet with some of my students regularly on a weekly basis, and we go over some of the writing. But there's no magic to it. That's the point, is that we grow in our language and our literacies every single day. Every single one of us is a language learner. And that the more we practice, the clearer our ideas are, the clearer we are with our own work. And it's no different for anyone else. It's just engagement in that practice. And I really strive to demystify the academic experience in getting a PhD, because what I've noticed is, depending on our positionality, we don't feel entitled to it. It's almost like we have to prove ourselves to say, I know I'm a woman, I know I'm a person of color, I know I'm this, I'm that, and the other, but I'm going to try and get this degree anyway. And that is giving one's power away. And in saying that, you know, what institutions are trying to move towards is the idea that diversity and excellence are synonyms. So how do we act that out? how do we show that diversity is excellent, is to include all in the ways of thinking and being that improves all of our thinking. And the more I've done this, the more I've realized I learn more from my students than I do just, you know, teaching something new to my students. I learn more. And I think that in itself has created a type of family. And I see ourselves as a family here.
So I want to acknowledge the time because we're set to wrap up at 4 today. Well, 4 in Eastern Standard Time and other iterations elsewhere. So Luis and Jackie, is there anything last words you want to say in regard to this set of questions?
I think from the kind of graduate student, junior faculty perspective, in terms of seeking out those supports and also acknowledging the multiple dimensions of privilege that I bring to answering this question, right? So being white reading or white passing, cisgendered, heterosexual male with class privilege and all these things wrapped into it, right? And so not having that same firsthand experience around faculty judging or lowering expectations or things like that, or not having my service be recognized, right? I've had the opposite where I get credit for the work that some of my female colleagues have done, right? And I have to like set the record straight and things, you know, so I want to acknowledge that privilege, but I also, I think I would latch onto this idea that, you know, to sort of be the other side of that coin that Diana and Raúl are describing around the kinds of mentorship and stuff that they're offering is to also proactively seek that out, right? So seek out, whether it's at your Center for Faculty Development, whether it's your someone in the Provost Office for Faculty Success, or, you know, find those people. If you're a doctoral student, right, find those faculty members, find those, you know, the student success centers, the cultural centers on campus, right? Find those places where you can have your space, where you can be heard and seen, right? To bring that work, and that's where you find mentors, that's where you find allies who can support you in the ways that Raúl and Diana described supporting their own students.
Yeah, and I'll just cap us off by saying, and just adding again, just one dimension that hasn't been touched on necessarily in this slide yet, but I know that this is much more complicated for those who have, you know, the identities that were mentioned so far, but just currently as a parent, and specifically as a woman in academia, because women parents are judged differently than male parents in academia, and then being a woman on the job market with 3 young children. Spoiler alert, it worked out okay for me, but you know, it can go differently for different people. So I would say, just echoing what has been said, of finding your web of mentors. So both in terms of your the faculty, for me as a graduate student who I looked up to, who navigated, who I really admired, for lack of better words, again, their work-life harmony or their integration, and then for finding your fellow graduate students who are experiencing similar things as you are, but also remembering for myself that who I am as a scholar is who I am as a whole person. And same with who I am as a whole person is who I am as a scholar. So when I looked for institutions, I looked for places where I knew I could bring my whole self. And that's where those were the places that I was looking where I could be. So I realize that we don't always have a choice to go somewhere where we feel we are welcomed, but I would encourage you, if that you feel like you represent an identity that isn't welcomed in some spaces, to really interrogate if you have the opportunity where you'll be next, and to figure out where do you want to go. So I'm very thankful I feel like I'm at an institution where I can bring my whole self to the table, and just remembering that you, to whatever degree that is possible for you, I hope that is something that you'll be able to seek out.
I want to say thank you all once again. I think today's webinar and everything you all have shared speaks to the fact that seeking work-life harmony isn't just a matter of, like, you know, managing to-do lists and making sure you're getting writing projects and teaching done, but it's an act of humanizing the work that we're doing. It's a critical act. It's an act of interrogation. It's an act of advocacy. And that when we take this work up in our own lives, we're also exemplifying for others what we're saying needs to be happening in education, period. So thank you all for sharing today. Thank you all attendees for being here. We encourage you to stay connected with both SIGs on social media, both on Facebook and Twitter. If you're not a member, please join today. We will be having several other webinars that later this year, and we'll be in touch about that. And I will be sending out the video recording and chat from today's webinar, so please feel free to pass it on, and I'll make sure it's captioned. Whoa, I got loud. Make sure it's captioned before it goes out. So that's it. Thank you all. Be well.
Thanks so much. Thank you.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
thank you. This is great.
Yeah,
everyone.
thank you.